In recent decades, a small part of every dollar spent globally has quietly found its way to a country few could even locate on a map. That country is Venezuela, a nation once celebrated for its vast oil wealth, now infamous for its economic collapse and staggering poverty. What was once a land of opportunity has become a tragic symbol of decline, its riches lost to political chaos, mismanagement, and a world that seems to have forgotten its fall. Welcome to Venezuela, the impossible country to live. In Venezuela's oil legacy. Venezuela's oil reserves, discovered in 1914, were once a driving force behind the modern world. From the asphalt on our streets to the rubber in our shoes and the plastics in our televisions and smartphones, Venezuelan oil was integral to daily life across the globe. Yet, despite its abundant natural wealth, Venezuela now finds itself as one of the poorest nations on Earth, with millions living in crushing poverty. In 2021, a survey by Andres Bello Catholic University revealed a shocking truth. 94.5% of Venezuelans live in poverty, surviving on less than $2 a day. A staggering 77% of the population, around 21 million people, more than the entire population of Portugal, scrape by on just $1.20 daily. This grim reality is made even more ironic by one of the country's greatest paradoxes. Venezuela boasts the cheapest gasoline in the world, costing less than 20 cents per liter. How can a country so rich in resources fall into such despair? The answer lies not only in the mismanagement of its wealth, but in a history steeped in political corruption and systemic failure. The oil boom and the rise of dictatorship. On December 14, 1940, the discovery of the first commercial oil well in Mene Grande, Zulia State, marked a turning point in Venezuelan history. This event transformed the country from a relatively obscure Andean nation into one of the world's leading oil producers. Under the dictatorial rule of Juan Vicente Gómez, Venezuela's oil wealth was harnessed not for the benefit of the people, but to solidify the power of the elite. Gómez's regime was marked by a ruthless suppression of dissent. Political opponents were silenced, the press was tightly controlled, and foreign companies were granted lucrative oil concessions. These concessions allowed them to exploit Venezuela's resources with little taxation, funneling the profits away from the general populace. While oil money flowed into the pockets of foreign corporations and Gómez's political allies, most Venezuelans saw little of the wealth. The growth of inequality. By 1935, Venezuela had become the world's second-largest oil producer, trailing only the United States. The newfound wealth promised prosperity, but instead, it deepened existing inequalities. While the elite grew richer, the rest of the population faced worsening conditions. The economy became overly reliant on oil, leaving Venezuela vulnerable to price fluctuations and stifling attempts at diversification. In the 1930s, Venezuela's bolivar currency soared in value by 70%, making imports cheaper and transforming Caracas into the world's most expensive city by 1939. Ironically, even as the country became a symbol of wealth, most Venezuelans were left behind. Local industries couldn't compete with cheap foreign imports, and farmers fled to the cities in search of oil-related jobs, abandoning their lands. The oil curse. Despite its vast wealth, Venezuela's dependence on oil eventually became its undoing. By the late 20th century, oil prices had become the dominant force determining Venezuela's economic health. In the 1970s, the OPEC cartel, partially founded by Venezuela, gained more control over oil production and prices. However, when the 1973 Arab oil embargo caused prices to skyrocket, Venezuela's government was ill-equipped to handle the sudden influx of wealth. Inflation surged, and excessive social spending failed to address deeper economic issues. Venezuela's dependence on oil left it vulnerable to market volatility, and when prices fell, the country was left with a bloated public sector and a fragile economy. Political corruption deepened, with leaders frequently misusing oil revenues rather than investing in the country's future. By the 1980s and 1990s, Venezuela was in a deepening crisis. Oil revenues dwindled, but political structures stubbornly resisted change. The middle class, once buoyed by oil wealth, began to shrink as inflation eroded purchasing power and unemployment soared. The country's once legendary oil wealth became a distant memory, and the wealth gap grew wider. A nation in crisis. Today, Venezuela stands at the precipice of collapse. A nation that once thrived on unparalleled oil wealth is now racked by a profound humanitarian crisis. The people, once the beneficiaries of abundant oil revenues, now face shortages of food, medicine, and basic services. The economy is crippled by staggering debt, and the bolivar, once a symbol of national strength, has all but collapsed. The failure to diversify the economy, combined with decades of political corruption and mismanagement, has left Venezuela vulnerable to both external shocks and internal instability. As oil prices remain volatile, the country's over-reliance on this singular resource continues to haunt its people. The tragic legacy of oil Venezuela's story serves as a stark warning. Natural resources, once the source of immense wealth, can become a curse when mishandled. The oil riches that once defined the country now exist only in the memories of a few. The dream of prosperity has long since faded, replaced by a harsh reality of poverty, unemployment, and crumbling infrastructure. What happened to Venezuela is not merely the result of isolated political decisions, but a series of missteps that led the nation down a perilous path of overdependence on oil, exacerbated by corruption and a failure to invest in the well-being of its people. As Venezuela continues to grapple with the consequences of its past, its future remains uncertain. If you enjoyed this video, please share your rating and favorite part in the comments. Before moving on to the next video, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps the channel. If you're new here, welcome. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out.